Remove those shutters or face daily fines. Claudia Whitmore, president of our HOA board, stood on my porch like she owned it, arms crossed and smug as ever. Her voice carried that same edge of superiority she always used when she thought she had me cornered. But this time, she wasn't just waving another citation. Her hand hovered near the taser on her belt, like intimidation was part of her job description. And the worst part? She aimed her eyes straight at my daughter, as if daring her to resist. "You think threats scare me, Claudia?" I said, my tone flat, unshaken. "Those shutters are state-mandated for hurricane safety. And you know what else? Every storm inspection I signed off on in this county still holds up in court." Her smirk faltered for half a beat. "Not long, but enough. If you've ever had to fight a battle that wasn't just about property lines, but about your family's safety, subscribe right now. Because this fight, it's not theory, it's personal, and it's happening in real neighborhoods like yours. My name's Michael Rowe, retired fire marshal, 30 years enforcing code compliance, and a man who doesn't play games when safety's on the line. The HOA thinks I'm just another retiree too stubborn to blend in. What they don't know is that my entire career was built on one principle: no one under my watch goes unprotected. And now they've come for my family. Those shutters they want gone? I didn't install them for looks. I put them up after the storm that took half our old street underwater. I buried friends who didn't make it out that night. My daughter Sarah moved back in after her divorce, her world already shaken. I couldn't let her sleep in a room where a pane of glass stood between her and another storm surge. Those steel shutters are more than metal. They're a promise. A promise I made the night I zipped body bags shut with my own hands. Claudia never cared about promises, though. To her, this whole neighborhood is a stage where she plays queen. The shutters? She calls them an eyesore. She claims they violate uniformity. What she won't admit is that my refusal to bow makes her look weak in front of the other board members. So she makes it personal. She comes to my door with citations, fines, and now, today, with a taser sparking in her grip. I can still hear the snap of electricity in the air, sharp like a hornet trapped in a jar. My daughter didn't flinch. Sarah's a police captain. She's stared down worse. But I felt my chest tighten like a vice because no matter how many criminals she's faced, seeing a so-called community leader target her in our own driveway was an insult I couldn't swallow. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some turned away. Fear does that. Makes people pretend they didn't see. But me? I've spent my life running toward flames, not away. And if Claudia thought her intimidation would make me tear down the one thing keeping my daughter safe, she was about to learn what happens when a fire marshal decides to fight with evidence, not fear. The taser never touched her, but the crackle of it lingered in the air long after Claudia stormed off my porch. She'd left her warning behind, taped crookedly to the storm shutters. Final notice. The paper flapped in the wind like it was mocking me. I pulled it free, folded it, and slipped it into my pocket. Not because I cared about their fines, I knew those threats were hollow, but because I wanted a record. Every step Claudia took would add weight to the case building against her, whether she realized it or not. Later that evening, I drove to the community clubhouse. If Claudia wanted a fight, I needed to see firsthand how she was selling it to the others. The place was packed tighter than usual. Folding chairs lined the walls, residents murmuring in low voices while waiting for the board to start its meeting. The tension in that room felt thick enough to choke on. I saw the shutters mentioned in the packet on every chair, listed as a violation of aesthetic covenant standards. Claudia sat at the front table with her gavel, like she was presiding over a courtroom. She tapped it twice, silencing the room. Her speech was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false concern. "When homeowners ignore our rules, property values suffer," she said. "We can't allow one man's stubbornness to compromise the entire neighborhood's worth." I didn't rise to take the bait, not yet. But as she talked, I studied the faces around me. Some nodded, eager to please. Others stared at the floor. A few looked toward me, eyes uncertain. That uncertainty mattered. Fear kept most of them quiet, but the seed of doubt was there. They weren't sure Claudia's crusade was really about protecting them anymore. My daughter's chair scraped back. Sarah stood tall, her uniform absent but her bearing unmistakable. "Property values don't save lives," she said flatly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Claudia's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was the moment the room shifted. They all knew what Claudia had done on my porch. Even if they hadn't seen it, word spread in neighborhoods like ours faster than a storm wind. A board president waving a taser at a resident's daughter wasn't leadership, it was liability. I could see it in their faces, fear for their own families, fear of what could happen if this kept escalating. I leaned back in my chair, calm on the outside, but my mind turning like gears. Claudia wanted to make this about appearances. Fine. But I'd spent 3 decades proving that appearances meant nothing in the face of code violations and safety risks. And if she wanted to drag my shutters into the spotlight, I was going to use that spotlight to show everyone the real danger. Here wasn't metal panels on windows, it was the reckless woman holding a weapon in front of neighbors. The victory strategy I'd been leaning toward began to take form right then. Claudia thought she was untouchable, but every HOA in this state answered to higher authorities. City inspectors, state safety codes, insurance requirements. She'd open the door herself when she tied property value to her campaign. If I could prove her enforcement actions put this neighborhood at risk of losing its insurance coverage or failing safety compliance, she'd fall harder than she could imagine. I didn't speak again that night. I didn't need to. Sarah's presence, calm but commanding, did more damage to Claudia's image than anything I could have said. But I left that meeting with a decision carved in stone. I wasn't just going to fight for my shutters. I was going to expose the whole pattern of reckless power plays Claudia had used to intimidate this community. As the meeting adjourned, I caught sight of Terrell Gaines, the security officer leaning in the back. His eyes flicked between me and Claudia, his posture rigid. He'd been there the night she raised that taser. He knew exactly how far she'd gone, and judging by the guilt etched into his face, he wasn't sure how long he could keep quiet. I walked out into the humid Florida night, the clubhouse lights glowing behind me. For the first time since this fight began, I felt the tide shifting. Not fast enough yet, but shifting. The cracks in Claudia's armor were showing, and I was ready to pry them wide open. The Florida night pressed heavy on my shoulders as I stepped off the clubhouse steps. The chatter from inside bled into the parking lot, neighbors whispering about what Sarah had said, about the way Claudia had clutched her gavel like it was the only thing keeping her in control. I knew those whispers would grow into something bigger, but not without proof, not without someone willing to stand beside me. That's when I noticed Terrell Gaines lingering near the side entrance, half-shadowed by a swaying palm. The security officer's uniform looked crisp, but his stance betrayed him. Arms crossed too tightly, eyes darting to the ground every few seconds, like guilt had weight, and he was carrying all of it. He shifted from one foot to the other when he saw me approach, jaw tight, shoulders hunched forward as if trying to shrink inside the fabric of his shirt. "Evening," I said quietly. His lips pressed into a line, and for a moment, he didn't answer. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, gaze fixed on the asphalt. It wasn't defiance, it was struggle. He was stuck between duty to the board that paid him and conscience clawing at his insides. "You saw it," I pressed, keeping my voice low. "On my porch. That wasn't leadership, that was assault." His hand twitched at the word. His weight shifted again, boots scuffing against the curb. His silence was louder than anything he could have said, and it told me enough. He knew I was right. The air smelled of damp earth, the stormwater canal behind the clubhouse gurgling faintly in the dark. I let the silence stretch, watching him wrestle with himself. His chest rose too quickly, shallow breaths betraying his nerves. Claudia had always banked on fear, fear of fines, fear of exclusion, fear of her wrath. Terrell had worn that fear like armor for months, but now it looked brittle, cracking under the pressure of truth. Finally, his eyes flicked up to meet mine, just a flicker, then gone again. But it was there, that flash of conflict, the part of him screaming to do the right thing. His fingers drummed once against his thigh before curling into fists. "Careful, Mr. Rowe," he muttered, voice gravelly and uncertain. "This board, they don't forgive." "And the law doesn't forget," I countered. My words hung there between us, a weight heavier than the humid night air. He looked away first, staring toward the glow of the clubhouse windows, where Claudia laughed with her loyalists, her arrogance filling the room like smoke. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch. I didn't push harder, not tonight. I'd seen enough in his body language, the restlessness, the guilt, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Sooner or later, that dam would break, and when it did, his testimony would be the nail in Claudia's coffin. Back at my truck, I sat behind the wheel, fingers drumming the steering wheel as the plan unfolded in my head. Outside authority intervention was the only way forward now. I had the professional background to expose the violations, but I needed more than just my word. I needed eyewitness accounts, safety reports, and a clear pattern of misconduct. The insurance companies and city inspectors would eat Claudia alive if I could prove her recklessness endangered the community. Terrell's struggle confirmed it. The cracks weren't just in her reputation, they were in her inner circle. Even the people paid to enforce her rules couldn't stomach the path she'd taken. It meant leverage, and leverage was everything in a fight like this. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, headlights bouncing off manicured lawns and identical facades. From the outside, it looked perfect. A postcard community. But I knew what lay beneath: fear, resentment, whispered discontent. And now, for the first time, they'd seen Claudia cornered by her own arrogance. They'd seen Sarah stand tall without fear. They'd seen me refuse to bend. At the edge of the development, I stopped by the storm shutters. My hand rested on the cold steel, tracing the ridges with my fingertips. To Claudia, they were defiance. To me, they were memory, promise, and proof. If I could turn this single object into a symbol of her abuse of power, then every neighbor who doubted her would have a reason to step forward. The battle wasn't won, not yet, but with Terrell's conscience cracking and the community beginning to murmur, Claudia's empire of control was no longer unshakable, and I intended to keep pressing until it shattered. The cold steel of the shutters still clung to my fingertips when the next escalation came. Claudia never let things cool off. She thrived on heat, on confrontation, on making an example of anyone who dared cross her. And true to form, by sunrise the next morning, she'd raised the stakes. I found out at the entrance to the neighborhood, sitting in my truck, forced to stop behind a line of cars. The HOA security gate wasn't moving. Residents leaned out of their windows, shouting, frustrated. A paper notice taped to the booth window caught my eye. Access suspended. Non-compliant homeowners subject to review. My name was printed at the bottom of the list, bold as day. I stepped out of the truck, the humid morning air thick with car exhaust and anger. Neighbors muttered, some glaring at me like I was the cause of the holdup, others shaking their heads at Claudia's latest stunt. The guard in the booth, someone new, not Terrell, refused to raise the barrier. "Orders from the board," he said, voice flat. "Suspended until further notice." Claudia had crossed a new line. Blocking my access to my own home wasn't just intimidation, it was unlawful restraint. And in a hurricane-prone region where access roads doubled as evacuation routes, it was also a public safety hazard. My mind clicked through statutes and city codes I'd spent years enforcing. She was writing my case for me, and she didn't even realize it. Sarah pulled up behind me, rolled down her window, and gave a slow shake of her head. "She's getting desperate," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the same sharp glint they did when she prepped for a raid. "This isn't going to hold up. Document it." I already had my phone out, recording video of the blocked gate, the notice, the line of cars. Residents began honking, their frustration boiling over, and for the first time, I saw something shift in their faces. This wasn't about me anymore. Claudia's obsession with breaking one man had now trapped dozens of families, late for work, kids crying in back seats, morning routines shredded. That was the gift in Claudia's arrogance. She always overplayed her hand. And now, she'd handed me proof that her board was willing to sacrifice community safety for control. Inside the clubhouse later that day, Claudia doubled down. She stood before the board members and residents, spinning her web of lies with practiced ease. "We cannot permit defiance. Non-compliant residents undermine order, and order is the backbone of this community." She gestured toward me as if I were Exhibit A, her voice dripping with satisfaction. But what she didn't notice was the restless shuffling of her audience. People who'd never spoken out before exchanged uneasy glances. Parents whispered about missed school drop-offs. A man in the back muttered something about calling the city. Claudia's gavel struck the table, but this time, the sound didn't silence the room. It only magnified the tension. I stood slowly, deliberate, making sure every eye followed me. Order doesn't mean locking people out of their homes, I said. It doesn't mean endangering evacuation routes in hurricane season. And it sure doesn't mean weaponizing a gate against families who pay the same dues as everyone else. My words were steady, calm, but the murmurs in the room grew. Claudia's smirk wavered. The victory strategy took a clearer shape in my mind. Outside authority, insurance companies, city inspectors, emergency management, none of them would overlook what I had on video. Claudia thought she could hold me hostage. In reality, she just handed me the strongest leverage I could ask for. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Terrell again. He wasn't in uniform this time, just sitting near the back, half hidden. But his body betrayed him. Hands clasped so tight his knuckles blanched, foot tapping nervously, gaze fixed on the floor whenever Claudia spoke. He knew what had happened at that gate, and though he hadn't stepped forward yet, his silence screamed louder than words. When the meeting broke, Claudia swept past me with her entourage, her perfume thick, her chin lifted high like she'd won. But the truth was clear in the air. Neighbors didn't leave united behind her. They left uneasy, questioning, murmuring in small clusters. A queen with a crown slipping, unaware the kingdom was watching her stumble. As I walked out into the fading light, I felt the shift again, stronger this time. Claudia had escalated. And with every escalation, she wrote the evidence I needed to bring outside authority crashing down on her reign. The glow of sunset still clung to the sky when I left the clubhouse, neighbors scattering in tense silence around me. Claudia thought she'd won another round, but I could feel the tide turning. The gate stunt wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. And I knew exactly where to take that evidence first. The next morning, I drove into the city, past strip malls and palm-fringed boulevards, until I reached the beige concrete building that housed the Office of Emergency Management. I'd walked these halls 100 times during my years as a fire marshal, filing reports, giving testimony, pushing for stronger hurricane codes. Today, I wasn't here as an official. I was here as a homeowner, but with the same determination. Protecting lives. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen when I signed in. But when I handed over my ID and explained who I was, her posture straightened. "Fire Marshal Rowe," she said, recognition flashing in her eyes. "I remember you from the hurricane drills last season." That familiarity mattered. It reminded me that I still carried weight in these circles, even in retirement. I was ushered into a small office, walls lined with maps showing evacuation zones and flood plains. The city inspector, a man named Alvarez, sat behind the desk. He glanced at the folder I carried, then at the flash drive in my hand. "What's this about, Mike?" he asked, wary but curious. I slid the video across to him. HOA board blocking residents from leaving. Suspended access through a gate during morning rush. Kids in cars, parents late to work, an entire lane choked off. If that had been an evacuation order, you'd be counting bodies. My words came sharper than I intended. But the memory of Claudia's smug face at the clubhouse lit a fire in my chest. Alvarez watched the footage in silence. The honking, the crying children, the guard refusing to lift the barrier. It was all there. When the clip ended, he leaned back, lips pressed tight. "That's not just negligence. That's a direct violation of emergency access statutes. You're saying this was board approved?" I nodded. "Their president herself, Claudia Whitmore. She signed off on it, used my name as justification. And this isn't isolated. She's escalated threats, fines, even brandished a taser at my daughter in front of witnesses." He exhaled slowly, tapping a pen against his desk. "Mike, you know how this works. We can't interfere with HOA disputes unless there's a public safety issue. But this qualifies. I'll flag it for review with the city attorney and the insurance oversight board. If her decisions put coverage at risk, the whole community's on the hook." That was the leverage I needed. Insurance companies cared about liability more than anything, and once they smelled risk, Claudia's empire would crumble. Leaving the office, I felt the weight shift again. For the first time since this started, it wasn't just me versus Claudia. It was her reckless power against statutes, inspectors, and insurance giants that wouldn't tolerate exposure. She'd picked the wrong battlefield. Driving back into the neighborhood, I slowed near the playground. Parents stood in small groups, kids darting between swings and slides. Whispers hushed when my truck rolled past. Some gave me guarded nods, others avoided my eyes. But what struck me most was how unsettled they looked. They'd heard about the gate, about the taser, about the shutters. Fear was giving way to anger, and anger meant people were ready to listen. I parked near the lake, where the stormwater retention wall stretched along the edge. The air smelled faintly of algae, the water still as glass. This spot had always been my place to think, to measure the cost of what I was fighting for. The wall itself was symbolic. It held back the floods, much like I'd been holding back Claudia's tide of intimidation. But even the strongest walls could break without reinforcements. That's when I saw him again. Terrell, walking his beat along the path, uniform sharp, but his movements tense. He nodded at me, but his eyes dropped quickly. His hands flexed at his sides, restless. The internal battle was written all over him. Claudia's hold was cracking, and he was stuck between orders and conscience. I didn't call out. Not yet. I knew he wasn't ready, but soon, when the weight of truth became heavier than his silence, he would tip. And when he did, Claudia wouldn't just lose control, she'd be exposed. For now, I had something even stronger, the city's attention. And I intended to use it like a blade. I left the lake with Alvarez's words echoing in my head. This qualifies. For the first time since Claudia started her campaign, I had confirmation from someone outside the gates that this wasn't just a petty HOA squabble, it was a public safety violation. And now, every step she took would cut deeper into her own credibility. By mid-afternoon, I drove across town to the regional insurance office. The building was glass and steel, gleaming in the sun, the kind of place designed to look untouchable. But I knew better. I'd spent years writing reports that wound up on desks just like these, shaping policies and premiums. Insurance companies cared about one thing above all: risk. And Claudia had just turned our neighborhood into a liability. Inside, the air was chilled, humming with fluorescent lights. A claims manager named Stevens met me in a small conference room, clipboard in hand. His tie was crooked, but his eyes were sharp. "You've got something urgent?" he asked. I laid out the evidence: the blocked gate, the suspended access, the list of names with mine bolded at the bottom. Then I played the video. The sound of honking horns filled the sterile room. The crying child in the back seat of a neighbor's car, piercing through the hum of the air conditioning. Stevens frowned, pen tapping against his clipboard. "This was board authorized?" he asked. "By the president herself," I confirmed. "She's already levied illegal fines, brandished a weapon, and now she's restricting access in a hurricane zone. If this continues, the liability isn't theoretical, it's imminent." He wrote something quickly, then looked up. "You realize this isn't just about her. If we confirm this behavior, the board could jeopardize the master policy. That means rate hikes or cancellations for every homeowner in your community." "That's exactly why I'm here," I said. "This isn't about me protecting my shutters anymore. It's about protecting the people who don't even realize what she's risking. You pull coverage and you'll have a riot on your hands." His silence stretched, but I saw the calculation in his eyes. He knew how fast insurance companies acted when liability outweighed profit. Finally, he nodded. "We'll send a compliance team. If what you're saying checks out, the board will be notified immediately." Walking out of that building, I felt the urgency sharpen into resolve. Claudia thought she was untouchable because she controlled fines and gates, but she couldn't. Control city inspectors, and she sure as hell couldn't control the insurance companies. If they pulled coverage, her reign would collapse overnight. By the time I drove back into the neighborhood, dusk had fallen. Porch lights flickered on, kids' bikes lay scattered in driveways, and the scent of grilled food drifted through the humid air. From the outside, it looked like any other Florida evening, but under the surface I could feel it, the unease spreading like a current through every household. At the mail kiosk near the clubhouse, I stopped to grab my letters. That's when I overheard two neighbors whispering. "Did you hear about the gate? My boss nearly fired me for being late," one said. The other shook her head, clutching a stack of envelopes. "If the insurance hikes because of this, we'll have to sell. We can't afford another dollar." Their voices carried the weight of fear, the kind that turned residents against their own leaders. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Every word confirmed what I already knew. Claudia was burning her support faster than she could rebuild it. All it would take was one push, one undeniable piece of proof to topple her facade. When I reached home, Sarah was on the porch, arms folded, her police badge glinting faintly under the porch light. "You've stirred the hornet's nest," she said. Her voice carried no judgment, only certainty. "She'll lash out harder before she falls." I glanced back toward the road, where headlights cut through the darkness. Terrell's patrol car rolled slowly past, his face shadowed behind the glass. Even from a distance, I caught the tilt of his head, the hesitation in his gaze. He hadn't spoken yet, but his body betrayed him every time. He was caught between loyalty and conscience, and the weight was breaking him down. Inside, I spread the letters across the table. Bills, circulars, another fine notice stamped in red. Claudia's signature scrawled across the bottom like she believed ink alone could scare me. I folded it neatly, added it to the growing stack of evidence, and whispered to myself, "Keep writing, Claudia. Every notice, every stunt, every overreach, one day soon, it'll all be read back to you in front of people you can't intimidate." The storm shutters gleamed faintly in the night outside my window. They weren't just steel anymore. They were a countdown clock, ticking louder with each day Claudia pushed too far. And I was done waiting. The fine notice still sat on the table when the knock came. It wasn't loud, more like someone testing whether they really wanted to be heard. Sarah's hand brushed her badge instinctively, but I held up a finger. "I've got it." I opened the door to find Terrell Gaines standing there, his security jacket zipped up too tight for the warm night. His cap was pulled low, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He glanced past me, checking the street, before stepping inside. With the hesitant air of a man about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. He didn't sit right away. He paced, arms folded, rubbing the back of his neck. Finally, he dropped into the chair across from me, eyes darting to the stack of notices on the table. His foot tapped against the floor, restless. "You know I can't be here," he muttered, voice gravelly, like every word scraped its way out. "If Claudia finds out, I'm finished." "You're already finished if you keep covering for her," I said. My tone wasn't sharp, but steady. "You saw what she did. You know where this ends." His gaze flicked to the shutters, gleaming in the porch light through the window. He exhaled hard, the sound carrying the weight of months of silence. "That taser!" His words trailed, but his hands clenched into fists. I should have stepped in. I was right there, and I froze. The board told me to back her no matter what. But when I saw her aim that thing at your daughter... He shook his head, shame tightening his features. Sarah leaned forward, calm but firm. "You're not the first officer who's had to choose between orders and conscience. What matters is what you do now." Terrell's throat worked as he swallowed. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice like the walls themselves might be listening. "She's been hiding things, decisions the board never approved. That gate stunt, she signed it alone. And the taser, she ordered me to log it as presentation of non-lethal deterrent, like it was policy. It's not. There's no record of her pulling it on your porch because she buried it." My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with confirmation. Claudia hadn't just been reckless. She'd falsified records to cover her tracks. And falsifying incident logs wasn't just dishonest. It was evidence of intentional misconduct, the kind of thing inspectors and insurers tore apart. Terrell's eyes met mine finally, steady now, even as sweat dotted his forehead. "I can't keep doing this. People trust me to keep them safe, not to cover up her power trips. If you push this to the city, I'll back you. I'll swear under oath what she did, but I need you to promise something." "What's that?" I asked. "That you don't let her drag the whole neighborhood down with her. People here, they're scared. Some are loyal, sure, but most are just trying to keep their homes. Don't scorch the earth when you burn her out." His words struck deep. He wasn't protecting Claudia anymore. He was protecting the community. And in that moment, I saw the conflicted guard I'd been watching for weeks transform into an ally. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't bear the weight of silence any longer. I nodded. "I don't want to scorch the earth. I want to rebuild it, safe, lawful, and fair." Relief washed over his face, subtle but unmistakable. He straightened in his chair, as if finally able to breathe. "Then I'll get you what you need. Logs, copies of orders, proof she acted alone. But you'll have to move fast. She suspects I'm wavering. If she cuts me out, I'm useless to you." Sarah's eyes locked on mine. She didn't need to say it. We both knew this was the break we'd been waiting for. Claudia's armor wasn't just cracked anymore. Terrell had handed us the lever to split it wide open. When he left, slipping back into the night like a man returning to enemy lines, I sat at the table staring at the stack of notices. Claudia thought they were weapons. She didn't realize every one of them, paired with Terrell's testimony, was about to become evidence in the hands of people she couldn't bully. The shutters rattled faintly as a breeze rolled through. To me, it sounded less like a threat and more like a drumbeat. Steady, inevitable, a march toward the reckoning she'd never see coming. The shutters rattled in the night air long after Terrell slipped away, like they were echoing the promise he'd made. For weeks I'd been gathering fragments, videos, notices, statutes, and now I finally had what Claudia couldn't spin. An insider ready to expose her lies. It was time to turn evidence into a weapon she couldn't dodge. The next morning, I drove to Sarah's precinct. The brick facade rose sharp against the sky, the flag outside snapping in the breeze. Walking through those doors always stirred something in me. Order, law, consequence. It wasn't just her workplace, it was neutral ground, a place where intimidation carried no weight. Claudia might rule with a gavel in the clubhouse, but here, her threats shrank to nothing. Sarah met me in her office, files stacked neatly on her desk, her badge glinting in the morning light. She listened as I laid out everything Terrell confessed. Falsified logs, unilateral decisions, the taser buried in paperwork. Her brow furrowed, but her voice stayed calm. Dad, this isn't just board misconduct. This is criminal falsification. If Terrell's ready to testify, she won't just lose her seat. She could face charges. That was the moment the counterplan crystallized. Claudia had always believed she was untouchable because she held the HOA charter in her fist. But once outside authorities stepped in, the charter wouldn't shield her. The city inspector had flagged her, the insurance compliance team was circling, and now with Terrell's testimony, the legal arm would have all it needed. I sketched out the steps in my notebook, each one methodical, each one tied to the background I'd honed as a marshal. First, Terrell's documents, logs proving Claudia acted alone. Second, my evidence, videos of the gate stunt, the fine notices, the shutter citations. Third, Sarah's legal expertise, guiding how to present it without a single misstep. One misfiled report could give Claudia room to wriggle free, and I wasn't about to let that happen. We spread everything across her desk. The fine notices stacked like bricks, each one dated, signed by Claudia. The video frozen mid-frame, a crying child in the back seat as horns blared. And the list of suspended residents at the gate, my name bold at the top. Sarah tapped her pen against it. You know what this means? Collective harm. Every person on this list becomes part of a pattern. This isn't just your fight anymore. That was exactly the point. Claudia wanted to isolate me, make it about one man and his shutters. But by targeting the community, she'd given me the leverage to rally them. And once neighbors realized their premiums, safety, and rights were at risk, they'd stop whispering in corners and start speaking out loud. As the plan took shape, I couldn't shake the image of Terrell's face, haunted but resolute. His body language had said it all, years of service crushed under the weight of silence. He wasn't just giving me evidence, he was handing me a piece of himself, and that carried responsibility. I couldn't let his risk go to waste. By midday, Sarah had already drafted the framework for how to present everything to the city and insurance investigators. We start with the safety violation, she said. The gate, that alone can trigger outside review. Then we layer the pattern, fines, threats, falsified logs. By the time we get to the taser, they'll see her as reckless and dangerous. No board can survive that exposure. I leaned back, the hum of the precinct filling the silence between us. For the first time in weeks, the path ahead felt clear. It wasn't about shouting louder than Claudia or outmaneuvering her petty fines. It was about precision, every step documented, every fact airtight, every authority aligned. When I left the precinct, the sun was high, the streets bustling. I drove back into the neighborhood, slowing near the lake, where families gathered under the shade of oaks. Kids ran, laughter carrying across the water. But the parents' faces were different now, tighter, worried. The gate stunt had shaken them more than they admitted. They didn't know it yet, but help was coming. I parked in my driveway, staring at the shutters gleaming in the sunlight. They'd gone from symbol to weapon. Claudia had tried to frame them as rebellion, but soon they'd stand as proof of her downfall. And with every piece of evidence laid out, Every ally aligned, I could feel it. The reckoning wasn't far. The shutters still glinted in the sunlight when I went back inside, but I didn't linger on them. Preparation mattered more than symbols now. If Claudia thought she could keep tightening the noose around my family, she was about to feel what it was like to be the one under pressure. I cleared the dining table, spreading out files, notes, and the evidence Terrell had promised to pass along. Sarah joined me, her sleeves rolled, a quiet determination etched into her face. We both knew what this stage demanded. Precision. Any gap, any missing detail, and Claudia would twist it into doubt. That night, Terrell slipped into the house again, his eyes darting like a man walking a razor's edge. He laid a small envelope on the table, sliding it toward me with a trembling hand. "Copies of the incident logs," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Look at the signatures. It's all her. No board approval, no witnesses, nothing but her initials." I opened the envelope and scanned the pages. Each report was the same, sanitized, stripped of context, rewritten to make Claudia look like she was following protocol. The Taser incident logged as a verbal warning. The gate closure described as a temporary safety measure. It was deliberate falsification, plain and simple. My stomach tightened, but I felt the steel in it too. This wasn't just negligence, it was intent. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowing. "With these logs, combined with your footage, we can prove a pattern. City investigators won't be able to ignore it." She glanced at Terrell. "You realize this puts you in the crosshairs." He nodded slowly, his jaw set. "I've lived with that since the night she pulled the taser. Every shift I've worked since, I've been sick knowing I was protecting her lies. I'd rather face the fallout than keep carrying that weight." His hands clenched, then released. For the first time, his shoulders straightened, like the act of speaking the truth finally let him breathe. We stayed at the table for hours, piecing everything together like a case file. My notes from the gate incident, the stack of fine notices, each dated and signed, the video evidence, and now Terrell's logs, the missing puzzle piece that tied everything together. By the time midnight rolled in, the case wasn't just solid, it was undeniable. But preparation wasn't only about paper. Claudia's strength had always been perception. She ruled by intimidation, making neighbors believe resistance was futile. If we wanted the authorities to act decisively, we also needed the community ready to stand behind it. Otherwise, she'd spin it as one man's vendetta. The next evening, I hosted a quiet meeting at my friend Mark's garage on the far side of the neighborhood. The hum of a box fan filled the air as folding chairs scraped across the concrete floor. Half a dozen neighbors showed up, hesitant at first, but their frustration outweighed their fear. Parents, retirees, young couples, each one tired of Claudia's chokehold. I laid the evidence out on a workbench. "This isn't hearsay," I told them. "This is her signature, her orders, her abuse of power. She's put every one of us at risk, our safety, our insurance, our homes. And I've taken this to the city. Inspectors are already reviewing it." The room went still. Some exchanged glances, others leaned in closer. Mark shook his head. "I thought she was untouchable." "Not anymore," I said, "but it's not just about me. When this breaks, the board will scramble to protect themselves. If you want real change, you'll have to speak up too." One by one, they nodded. Not loudly, not with the fire of rebellion, but with the quiet conviction of people realizing they weren't alone anymore. And in that silence, I knew the balance of power had shifted. Later, back home, I packed the evidence into a weatherproof folder, ready for Alvarez and the compliance team. My hands brushed the cold metal of the shutters as I locked the door for the night. Claudia thought she could bury the truth under fines and threats. But the case was built, the witnesses aligned, and the community stirred awake. Preparation was done. The next step was execution. And I was ready to light the fuse. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, thick with evidence and heavier than it had any right to be. Every notice, every log, every piece of Claudia's arrogance pressed together into one weapon I intended to deliver. My truck rumbled down the road toward City Hall, the morning sun throwing gold streaks across the windshield. Today wasn't about collecting proof anymore. Today was about putting it in the right hands. City Hall was buzzing when I arrived, clerks darting between offices, phones ringing, the hum of bureaucracy alive in every corner. I knew this world. I'd spent decades here, dropping off safety reports, pushing for funding, fighting red tape that never moved fast enough. But today felt different. Today I wasn't walking in as a retired marshal begging for attention. I was walking in as a homeowner whose family had been attacked, carrying evidence no one could ignore. Alvarez met me in the lobby, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He gave a tight nod, motioning me into a side conference room where the blinds were drawn and a single fluorescent light buzzed overhead. "You brought the file?" he asked. I placed the folder on the table, sliding it across. Everything, logs, fines, video evidence, signed orders, all Claudia's hand, and a witness ready to swear under oath. He flipped the folder open, scanning quickly. The further he read, the tighter his jaw set. "This isn't sloppy enforcement. This is calculated. She falsified reports. And the gate stunt? Jesus, if we'd had an evacuation order." His words trailed into silence, the implication heavy. "Insurance is already reviewing," I said. "If they pull coverage, the entire neighborhood pays. People will turn on her fast. But I want the city in front of this, not scrambling after." Alvarez nodded slowly. "We'll move it up. This will trigger a formal review with the attorney's office. If your witness steps forward, we'll subpoena records and bring her in." That was the moment I knew the strategy had teeth. Outside authority wasn't just circling anymore. It was coming straight for Claudia, and no gavel in a clubhouse could silence that. When I walked back out into the daylight, I felt lighter. But I also knew this wasn't over. Claudia wouldn't go quietly. She'd sense the walls closing in, and she'd thrash harder than ever before, which meant I had to prepare the ground for the next step, the confrontation. That evening, the HOA announced an emergency board meeting. The notice was plastered on every mailbox, urgent in bold letters. Mandatory attendance, community concerns regarding compliance. I almost laughed when I read it. Claudia thought she was setting a stage to crush me publicly. What she didn't realize was that she was walking straight into the spotlight I'd built for her downfall. The clubhouse was already filling when I arrived. Folding chairs scraped against tile, neighbors fanned themselves with the paper notices, the low buzz of frustration hanging in the air. Claudia sat at the front table, her gavel poised like a weapon, her smile thin and brittle. She looked at me when I walked in, her eyes sharp, calculating. She could sense it. Something had shifted, something she couldn't quite name. Sarah slipped into the row behind me, her presence steady. Across the room, I caught sight of Terrell standing near the back, his hands clasped in front of him, shoulders stiff. Our eyes met for just a second. He gave the faintest nod. He was ready. Claudia raised her gavel and banged it once. "This meeting will come to order," she said, her voice loud, carrying over the murmurs. She launched into her speech, a tirade about uniformity, about disobedience, about how one man's selfishness threatened the harmony of the community. Her words echoed against the walls, rehearsed and venomous. But this time, the crowd didn't sit in silence. I heard the whispers ripple, saw the frowns deepen. A mother in the front row crossed her arms, glaring openly. A man muttered, "Not this again." Claudia's grip tightened on the gavel, her rhythm faltering. I let her finish. Then I stood, slow and deliberate, every eye in the room tracking me. The folder was in my hand. "You want to talk about harmony?" I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Let's talk about what happens when the person sworn to protect this neighborhood falsifies reports, blocks emergency exits, and threatens residents with weapons." Gasps swept through the room. Claudia's smile vanished. Her fingers clenched the gavel so hard her knuckles whitened. And for the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like someone about to be unseated. The confrontation had begun. And this time, the walls weren't hers to control. The room went silent after my words, a silence so sharp it cut through the humid air of the clubhouse. Claudia's eyes darted to her board members for backup, but their faces were pale, their lips pressed tight. She slammed the gavel against the table. "Out of order!" she barked, her voice cracking. "This is slander and will not be tolerated." But the crowd didn't buy it. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into questions. A father in the back stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "My son missed school because of that gate stunt. You trapped us like cattle. Is that in the bylaws too?" Applause erupted, quick and raw. Claudia pounded her gavel again, but the sound no longer commanded obedience. It only magnified how desperate she was. I opened the folder and held up one of the incident logs. "These are her signatures," I said, turning so the crowd could see. No votes, no approvals, no checks, just Claudia acting like judge, jury, and executioner. This isn't order. This is abuse. Gasps swept through the room. Some leaned forward, others craned their necks to see. Claudia lunged forward, snatching at her microphone. "Those documents are fabricated," she snapped, but her voice trembled, and in that tremor, the truth showed itself. That's when Terrell rose from the back, his security jacket unzipped, sweat gleaming at his temple. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. "They're not fabricated." Every head turned toward him. He swallowed hard, then stepped into the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the tense quiet. "I logged those reports myself. Claudia ordered me to falsify them. The Taser incident, the gate closure, she made me bury it all." The room erupted. Shouts overlapped, neighbors demanding answers, others gasping in disbelief. Claudia's face drained of color, her gavel clattering against the table as she tried to regain control. "Lies!" she shrieked, but her voice cracked under the weight of Terrell's confession. He kept going, each word heavier than the last. I stayed quiet because I was scared. But what happened on Mr. Rowe's porch? What I saw that night? It crossed every line. She aimed a weapon at his daughter, a police captain, and then told me to write it up like a warning. I can't carry that anymore. His chest rose and fell fast, but his eyes were clear, unflinching. The crowd exploded, their voices a storm. Some demanded her resignation, others shouted for the police. A woman near the front burst into tears, clutching her husband's arm. Claudia pounded the table again, screaming over the chaos, but her words drowned in the tidal wave of outrage. Sarah stood then, calm but commanding, her voice slicing through the noise. "Enough!" The authority in her tone snapped the room back to silence. She stepped into the aisle, her eyes locked on Claudia. "I am Captain Sarah Rowe of the Metro Police Department. You threatened me with a taser. You falsified reports, and you endangered this community. I'll be filing charges." The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. Claudia's face twisted, fury boiling in her eyes, but the fear beneath it betrayed her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her own weapon, fear, had turned on her. Neighbors began shouting again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was solidarity. "We want her out." One yelled, "Vote her down!" Another added. The board members exchanged frantic looks, realizing the tide had turned completely. One of them stood, his voice breaking. "Effective immediately, I move to suspend Claudia Whitmore as president pending investigation." The cheer that erupted nearly rattled the windows. Claudia's gavel slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor, ignored. She slumped back in her chair, eyes darting wildly, but no one came to her defense. I stood there, steady, letting the moment wash over me. For weeks she'd held this community in a grip of fear, and now, in one public confrontation, it had shattered. Terrell's voice, Sarah's authority, the evidence in my hands, it had all come together in the perfect strike. As neighbors filed out, their voices buzzing with relief and disbelief, I caught sight of Terrell. His shoulders, once hunched, now stood tall. He nodded once, not to me, but to himself. He'd chosen the right side, finally free of the weight that had chained him. Claudia sat frozen at the table, her crown of fear gone. And I knew this was only the beginning. The authorities would take it from here. But her reign in this neighborhood was finished. Claudia didn't move as the board voted her out. She just sat there, pale and rigid, her gavel lying useless on the floor. For weeks she'd ruled with fear, but now the air itself seemed to reject her authority. Neighbors filed past her without bowing their heads, without lowering their eyes. They didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a liability. I lingered in the back of the clubhouse, letting the noise settle. Sarah stood near the front, calmly speaking with the interim board members about what came next. Terrell leaned against the wall, arms crossed, shoulders finally free of that weight he'd carried. He caught my eye, and for the first time, his nod wasn't nervous. It was steady, sure. The victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like a tide finally rolling back after weeks of pressure. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. Claudia had been stripped of the one thing she valued most: control. But the consequences were only beginning. The following week, I met with Alvarez again, this time at the municipal building. The folder of evidence lay open between us, no longer contested, no longer doubted. Terrell's testimony was logged, the insurance company had confirmed they were reviewing the neighborhood's coverage, and the city attorney was preparing charges for falsification of safety reports. Alvarez tapped the papers. You realize this doesn't just end with her removal. Civil suits will follow. The state could suspend the HOA's authority until a new election is certified. You may have changed the future of this entire community. I leaned back, the weight of his words sinking in. I hadn't set out to dismantle an empire. I just wanted my daughter safe behind her shutters. But sometimes one fight revealed rot buried deeper than anyone wanted to admit, and once exposed, it demanded cleansing. Back in the neighborhood, change came quickly. Notices went out, legal ones this time, calling for an emergency election to restructure the board. Neighbors who had once cowered now stepped forward, volunteering to run, offering ideas for transparency, safety, fairness. For the first time, I saw faces lit with hope instead of fear. Parents smiled at me in the park, couples waved from their driveways, retirees stopped me at the mailbox to say, "Thank you." The shutters on my daughter's window became a symbol, not of defiance, but of protection, of a promise that stood when intimidation failed. Other homeowners began asking about installing their own, and this time, no one threatened them with fines. Instead, the new interim board discussed how to subsidize hurricane safety measures, finally living up to the name of a community association. One evening, Sarah joined me on the porch, the air warm, cicadas buzzing in the trees. She rested her hand on the railing, watching the lights of the neighborhood flicker on one by one. "You know," she said softly, "Claudia thought she was teaching this community to fear her. But in the end, she taught them how to stand up." I nodded, feeling the truth settle deep in my chest. Fear burns out fast when you put it against truth. Across the street, Terrell walked his beat, no longer slouched, no longer shrinking. Kids rode bikes past him, waving, and he waved back. He wasn't Claudia's enforcer anymore. He was the guard he'd always meant to be. As night settled in, I leaned back in my chair, the shutters gleaming faintly in the moonlight. They'd started as steel. They'd become a promise. Now, they were proof that no board, no matter how smug or cruel, could strip away a man's right to protect his family. This wasn't just my victory. It belonged to every neighbor who'd whispered in fear, to every resident who'd paid fines they never should have owed, to every family who'd felt small under the weight of Claudia's rule. The reckoning had come, and the community was stronger for it. And to you watching, if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.